We are the only robot in the world that completely replicates keyhole surgery. In 5 years from a drawing to operating on a human, that's something of a record.
Welcome to Health in Hyperdrive, the podcast where we explore the breakthroughs shaping the future of healthcare. I'm Dominic James, and today I'm joined by Mark Slack, Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of CMR Surgical, and one of the world's leading voices in the evolution of robotic-assisted surgery.
We can get patients up and out of their beds, usually on the same day. I really do think that it's going to be a very different world that we see in 10, 15 years' time.
Mark, welcome to Health in Hyperdrive.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Mark, I think the place I'd love to start this conversation is really, let's talk about Versius. I've been to your website. It looks incredible, really cool. Could you maybe explain in simplistic terms what is kind of Versius? How does it work? What does it do?
So Versius is a robotic assisted system, and it's designed to help surgeons do keyhole surgery. There have been other robots around, what I call traditional robots. They are different construct from ours, and I think we have some advantages in that we can completely replicate keyhole surgery, but with a whole pile of advantages for the surgeon, such as 3D vision, direct mapping of hand movement to instruments that have wristed ends, so they difficult tasks like suturing is done better. So the idea behind it is to increase the uptake of keyhole surgery, and with all the benefits that it gives patients.
And could you describe, like, for people who haven't seen it, I know people will go to go to your website afterwards, but could you describe a little bit, like, what does Versius look like?
So the great advantage of Versius for us is its size. It's actually quite small. It's only about 5'7" tall, and each arm has a footprint on the base of 38 by 38 centimeters, so it fits on the table very neatly, also allowing space for other members of the tech team and medical team to be there. So the surgeon sits at a console with hand controls and a 3D monitor, and actually controls the robot. Then at the side of the bed, there are 3 or 4 arms. One arm holds the camera, which goes through the trocar into the body, and the other 3 arms hold the instruments, which carry out the task of dissecting and cutting and suturing and so on. So it's a surgeon still doing it. Decision making and the procedural steps are all still commanded by the surgeon, but with all the advantages of robots over what we call straight stick laparoscopy or keyhole surgery, which is incredibly difficult.
Can you maybe describe a little bit the traditional laparoscopic surgery? Because, I've watched some of the video. I actually knew nothing about it. I had an idea in my head. I didn't realize there's like long sticks, and I think I read somewhere it was described as like tying a knot with chopsticks while looking in a mirror or something like that.
I think it's not a bad analogy, and I've certainly heard that before.
Right.
But, so keyhole surgery came in the 90s, in real volume. It's incredibly difficult to do, and not everybody can. I trained people in keyhole surgery for about 25 years, and it's an instrument about that long.
Mm-hmm.
You're standing on the bedside with your arms raised.
Mm-hmm.
If your movements are accentuated. If you move your hand right, the instrument goes left on the screen,
Mm-hmm.
and the tips aren't stay rigid. So to tie a knot, if I wanted to teach you to tie a knot with a normal straight stick keyhole, so it would take about 60 hours, whereas with the robot would take you about an hour.
And and just for people listening rather than watching, when you said that long, that's about like half a meter or something, maybe 40 centimeters.
40 centimeters, yes.
Yeah, and as I look at kind of Versius versus the traditional instruments, the traditional instruments seem that they're very rigid, as you've described, and I've seen like little claws at the end. Whereas Versius, for people who haven't seen it, there's like lots of actuators. That's probably the wrong term, but it seems incredibly dexterous, both kind of the arm, but also the instrument at the end as well.
It basically gives you back the human wrist. It's got a wrist on the end. It's got an articulated wrist,
Mhm.
which can move through 720 degrees. And it can flex and it can yaw and everything. So when you come to tie a knot, it's like using your fingers to tie a knot, where you can position it appropriately to get the knot tied.
So I think kind of with that kind of setting out of the way, and it's I'd encourage everyone to just go to your website or watch some videos. It's really really looks very cool. Maybe we can kind of jump into your sort of background a little bit. Like, how did you kind of get into this? I mean, you started as a surgeon. You've done education. You teach students. You're an inventor, and now you're a co-founder of a very cool surgical robot company.
Well, I mean, as you say, I am trained in medicine in South Africa. I also specialized in gynecology as a gynecological surgeon, and the division of gynae that I worked in is all surgical. And then I spent most of my career at Cambridge University, and both teaching, doing research, and training surgeons. And I realized I ran a course to train keyhole or minimal access surgery, and realized I couldn't get everybody to the level that I really wanted them to be. And that's when I started to think, well, maybe robots would help close that gap.
Mm.
I mean, keyhole's difficult. I'm short, so I had to stand on a platform.
Mm.
You've got your arms up in the air. You're there for 2-3 hours. Um, the articulation is incredibly difficult, and some of the tasks some people never master. And that's why I started thinking, could we use a robot with all the advantages, 3D vision, magnification of the vision, depth perception as a consequence of the 3D, the articulated instruments, the direct mapping. I thought that would be great. And I went and looked at the traditional robots available. I didn't like what they were on offer. So with some colleagues, decided to build our own.
And so you made that you made that shift from, are you still practicing medicine? No.
No.
So you made that shift to kind of help others at scale versus practicing and making your difference as a surgeon. Was that like,
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, I'd sort of done pretty much. I'd done a lot of innovation in surgery as well. Brought in new operations that were world firsts, and did some pretty advanced surgery. So I didn't have a lot more to prove to myself in that field, and I thought it would be better to think of something more globally that would mean that more people could get keyhole surgery. Keyhole surgery reduces the complications of it compared to the open surgery and by about 50%.
Mm.
And a good example is a wound infection. If you get a wound infection with a big wound, 50% of those people will have to go back into hospital, and 12 to 20% will need to go back into theatre.
Mm.
Now, the incidence of infection in keyhole surgery is the same,
Mm-hmm.
but you treat them as outpatients, saving literally billions of dollars per annum. And so, I started to think more global. What could we do to have a greater impact on health internationally?
And just kind of building on that a little bit, I mean, you mentioned kind of from a system perspective, but also from the patient perspective, it feels completely different.
Well, number one, it's safer.
Yeah.
It has low complication rates, considerably low, as I said, 50% in some areas. And it's less painful
Mm.
because the robot knows where it goes through the abdominal wall, and it exerts no pressure on the wall at all. And the advantage of our system is that we go through the normal standard trocars, which are 5 millimeters. So yes, we can get patients up and out of their beds, usually on the same day.
Could we talk maybe a little bit about like the complications around training for surgery? Because I think that's one of the kind of the key benefits here. If I think about um, medical surgeon training or selection. Certainly in the UK, you have to be super smart to be a surgeon. You have to pass really hard exams. You have to have a really good understanding. But then dexterity and, as you described, an ability to perform is like a completely different skill set and filter. And so effectively that becomes a barrier, and then training, I think I read, could take up to sort of 10 years for someone to be really competent.
I think one of the problems that's happened, if you go back 20 years in the UK, there were about a third of the doctors in training that there are now. But with the European Working Time Directive, you could limit their hours per week. They all do resident on calls, that's nights. So they have a lot of days off, not due to their own, and that actually limits their ability to train. and to actually, we used to operate 4 or 5 times a week. Some of these operate once a week if they're lucky. So yes, they've got to pass an exam. They've got to do a lot of studying, but surgery is a craft, and you need to do a lot of it to get good at it. And there's some quite scary statistics that about 60 or 70% of trainees at the end of their training themselves do not believe they're ready for independent practice. So we do need a radical shake-up of surgical training anyway, but perhaps robots will help us. The example I gave you earlier, if to teach somebody to tie a knot 40 to 60 hours, on the robot, 30 minutes to 60 minutes, and potentially with AI in the future. So hopefully this will be one of the ways we improve training.
And we and consequently, that gives more people the opportunity to have much better surgery.
So at the moment, with all the advantages of keyhole surgery, only about 40% of people get it. So you go to the United States of America, supposedly the most sophisticated health system in the world, about 40% of people get keyhole.
Who
Could do have open,
Okay.
and still the majority get open surgery with all the complications and the consequences. And the NHS last year stated that they wanted to get 80% of the operations in the NHS performed by keyhole surgery by
And
2030.
and the constraint there is the ability of surgeons to do it.
Correct.
The number of
Yeah, and they're not going to do that with normal laparoscopy. So that's where robots will come into the equation.
I think that's a really incredible point. That's a doubling, right? Like
Yes.
it's not a small increment or a small change. It's
No,
it's doubling.
but the money that it will save the NHS is incredible.
Mhm.
I mean, the litigation bill in the NHS at the moment is 60 billion. So we do need to have some radical steps to lower that. So with better training and better outcomes, we suddenly knock a lot off that bill.
Okay. I'd like to maybe just expand on the topic, on the kind of the broader landscape of robotic surgery. Like, as I, started investigating this field, I guess I had something in my head, maybe something from Star Wars. Maybe it's the Elon Musk kind of Tesla Optimus robot replacing the surgeon with a humanoid. I didn't really know what robotic surgery is, and in our conversations in preparation, you gave me a little bit of an overview that there's kind of a broader spectrum. Would you mind just kind of sharing a little bit, like the bigger picture of robotic surgery, and maybe the different sort of categories?
Okay, so at the moment there are literally new robots every week coming
Mhm.
out. Okay, and you broadly define them into what we call soft tissue robots that do the equivalent of keyhole surgery. And then you have hard tissue robots that do orthopedic type surgery, knees and hips and so on. And now spinal surgery as well in the hard tissue. And now robots are coming into neurosurgery in the head as well, and in microsurgery for plastic surgeons. So our robot is what we call a soft tissue robot. It's a slave master arrangement. The surgeon drives it. The robot does the technical work for them, but it's not autonomous in any way. It's completely controlled by the surgeon. And we replicate all keyhole surgery. So it's transoral, thoracic, colorectal, upper GI, urology, gynecology, and most recently and excitingly, pediatric surgery.
Mm. What would you say are the kind of the current trends and the innovations that's happening in robotic surgery?
So there was a single robotic system around from about 2001, and its patents sort of started disappearing in about 2018, which has prompted a lot of companies to build robots. Um, what we call a traditional robot is what we call a remote center of motion robot. And there are a lot of them now, and they all hold their instruments like you'd hold a dagger, and they are on a physical rail, the arms. And because of that, they need to be very large. So they're very tall. They weigh up to 600 kilograms each. They normally do not fit through doors. So it requires quite a lot of modification in theater. There are other robotic systems aimed at doing hybrid surgery. So part of the surgery, the surgeon will do traditionally keyhole until they come to the difficult part, like tying knots, and then they'll use two robotic arms. But those robots can't do the whole operation. And then one like ours is a complete replica of keyhole surgery. So we go through the same ports, we use the same size ports, we use the same procedural steps, and we mimic the surgery as it's done handheld laparoscopy. So we probably are the only robot that really can say we replicate keyhole surgery.
And could you talk about maybe like some of the advancements or some of the other things that maybe robotic surgery unlocks? So, for example, I think when we were speaking previously, you said, well, actually now you have data, so you can understand. You've got a digital recording of how a surgery was done, and then you would have that on a macro or an aggregated scale, so you can start to do analysis and make improvements there.
Robots are opening up something. So when you've got surgery, you've got the patient and you've got the surgeon. You can have videos, obviously. With the robot, you've got the robot in between the surgeon and the patient, and it's measuring all sorts of things. So the best example, it measures telemetry. So it measures the movement of the instruments and measures the movement of the surgeon's hands. And already on analysis, the robot can distinguish between an expert surgeon and a novice by their hand movements. So that has implications with training one day. When you do your annual appraisal, you might have to go and sit in the robot and tell you whether you're good enough or not, or whether you're inefficient, and whether the areas you could retrain and become more efficient. So those are sort of just the beginning. I mean, we had a surgeon complain that something had broken when he was taking his instrument out. And we could look at the telemetry and show that he hadn't straightened it before he wanted to take it out. And then a week or two later, we changed the software. So when they press the button to change an instrument, the machine straightens it. So if the surgeon forgets to, that's dealt with.
And that's like really quite game shifting, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned a little bit like your experience in innovation in surgery and coming up with new methods, and but having the data and the tools and being able to see that on a kind of factual and aggregated basis, that feels like it's quite a transformative thing.
It's so exciting. I mean, we're just scratching the surface at the moment, but it has implications for training. It has implications for research. It has implications for efficiency. You could also break down the surgery. You could go to a surgeon and say, in that certain stage, you're taking 20% longer than anybody else. What are you doing wrong? What can we improve it? And that's just the beginning. It'd be a bit like your car, which has got lane control in it. When the surgeon, if they wanted to use the electrocautery and it wasn't visible on the screen, which is a way people get injured, the machine could say, we can't see it. Or if you get to a certain part of the anatomy, say, beware. The ureter is very close to here. So in the beginning, it'll be incremental steps. I see it as early warning systems, but in time, that will grow. And automation will increasingly become part of it as well. So for tying a knot, that may well become an automated process. So the surgeon puts the sutures and presses a button, and the machine ties the knot for them.
And could we talk about AI? And we're going to have to. It's completely transformative. Does it play a role in the surgical robots, or will it in the future?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't you can't do anything at the moment without AI, and there's also an incredible amount of nonsense spoken about AI, and there've been an awful number of AI apps and so on that have failed already. So I think I always tell my trainees and people, I said, imagine if you had an AI app that could reduce your complications by 47% and your deaths by 38%. How much you pay for it? No, a lot. And there's a thing called the WHO checklist. If you ask 17 questions before an op, that will make sure that you're doing the correct things, and that will actually take out. So not everything has to be AI or expensive to be good. But with something like that, we're probably going to put it into our startup program. So when you're setting up the robot, before you can start operating, it will make you go through those questions. So AI is going to be a big change. We've got a huge amount of work going on around, the big one at the moment will be, first of all, to put all your videos on and get so the first 100 will be tagged by humans, pointing out what's various, and then the machines will teach themselves. And so that automatically gives you better anatomical differentiation and understanding. And then, as I said, and also you can then look, standardization is what's needed for good surgery. All surgeons do it slightly differently. But when I've got 43,000 telemetry records and a similar number of videos, and I've got 15,000 clinical outcomes. So all of a sudden, you're sitting with a massive data set and can say, old Joe Bloggs over there gets much better results. And we notice in steps 3 and 4, he or she does something different. And that way you can standardize and you can feed back to surgeons things that they could do better in their execution of their surgical tools.
And this is one of the great benefits of AI. It's it unlocks data, really. Like, that's, if I were to think of a shortcut, like, we've for many years we've had incredible amounts of data. It's just really hard to know what to do with it, to interpret it, to turn it into something kind of useful and insight. So some of the things that, like, some of the data sets that you're talking about, the telemetry and the video, it would be hard for a human, or even there's probably not even analytical tools around at the moment that would be able to interpret that. And so having a flexible, intelligent machine that can kind of comb through all that and link it to good outcomes, that's got to be.
Well, that gets into the realm of real world data, which becomes real world evidence, and we're sort of tiptoeing into that world. But already you're starting to see papers being published with 1 million patients in them. I mean, that's transformative.
Yeah.
It used to be 120, 130. And you can't really have any fraud when you've got 1 million. It's difficult to make it up. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can measure trends. So to me, the data side is almost as exciting as anything else. So we have a registry, which we, at the moment, getting ready to try and automate. So then you'd have clinical records on every single patient you operate on for every single surgeon that uses the system. And so you can see the best surgeons, then you go and watch what they're doing better, mimic their work. If a surgeon's not doing as well, you can review it and perhaps take steps to make them better and safer. So, and the data, we will just learn so much from it. And as you correctly say, with small data sets, there's all sorts of bias involved in it. With these big data sets, and we're talking even, I mean, as I said, I've got 43,000 telemetry records. We've only just started to peep at those.
Yeah, I remember when I first started working in pharmaceuticals, and I worked for a large pharmaceutical company. I started reading clinical trials for the first time, and I was really surprised how few people are actually in clinical trials. And then from that, these drugs get rolled out kind of globally on relatively low sample sets, and I think a lot of people don't actually sort of understand or realize that. And the transition from, say, that, as you said, a few hundred people, to millions of records and real world evidence in real environments, with real patients, not the kind of the ideal environment. That's just incredible, right?
Well, I mean, pharma is, we're not discussing pharmacy, but it is another interesting area. There are very few studies done on women.
Yeah.
Because they have different hormonal fluctuations in the monthly cycle. And so the drugs have been tried on men and then prescribed to women. They're not on different age groups. So there's all sorts of reasons why and it's incredibly expensive. If I was to do a study with 220 patients, randomized study in surgery, it will cost me about 1.9 million. And we've just finished a study with 150 patients, who we were quoted roughly that by a contract research organization. But by using real world data in our registry, we've brought it home for 350,000. And that's something in the health service we have to work out as well. We've got to try and work out ways to cut costs and make health more affordable.
And you mentioned sort of women, but it's just also more broadly inclusive, right? Because it's the true population of people having surgery, certainly where there's people very kind of sick or in very poor condition. Quite often they wouldn't be included in trials, sometimes younger people and things along these lines, right?
It's a very curated group of people that are going to trials. And that's where real world evidence does become incredibly exciting, because You literally can take all the people that you're operating on in a standardized fashion, being collected, and having a repository of data that you can then mine and understand.
Can we maybe talk a little bit about automation? You started touching on some of these things that you could build into the system of, some warnings, alerts, watch out for this, watch out for that. Is there a world where um, the robots become more automated, or they can do some kind of maybe simple procedures on their own, or even more complicated ones?
So if you'd asked me that 3 years ago, I would have said no. But the acceleration of AI, acceleration of LLMs and so on, are making all these things look like they could be very possible. So I'll give you an example. Every patient's a different size,
Mhm.
and most of the tables are different. And the advantage of our system is having this modularity that you can set up. But that does pose, in the early days of experience with it, some difficulty for surgeons. So already my team is working on something where they can put in the size of the patient, and they'll put in which operation the patient is going to have. And then a visual machine will beam onto the ground where the bedside units must be placed. And you press a button, and the arms will come out on their own and pose themselves ready to go into the abdomen. So that's a good example of just making setup efficient and shorter and so on. But yes, automation will come in. There'll be early warning systems warning you that you're near a dangerous structure,
Mm.
or that surgeons experience a certain complication relatively commonly at a certain point. And then it will go on to warning systems, bit like you moving your lane in the car.
Mm.
And then it will be things automated, physical acts.
Mhm.
I mean, these are in animal work. People have automated a cholecystectomy from beginning to end.
Sorry, what's one of those?
That's taking out the gallbladder,
Oh, okay.
and they've automated that in the laboratory. So, I mean, one of the big challenges in live humans is that they're breathing, and the organs inside the body don't move in a pattern.
Ah.
If you take a deep breath in, your bowel will move in response to it. Your liver will move 4 centimeters. But again, a few years ago, I would have thought that would have been impossible to learn. I don't think that anymore. And when you see what some of these systems are starting to do, and a lot of this is experimental, and there we've got to be very cautious. These value-based medicines, so we mustn't be paying for things that give very marginal gains. And these and value, it's the value-based, and then there's evidence-based. It's got to actually improve things. So it will put the onus, all these AI claims and so on. We've got to go back and say, does this genuinely make an improvement and justify the increased cost to get that improvement?
I'd like to maybe, I probably should have done this before. I'd like to step back a little bit, because we kind of skipped over a, a piece of this story, which I think is really fascinating, which is like, how do you go from an idea to a robot? Like that, eh, it, there seems to be a massive leap. So you kind of you painted a very simple picture. You thought robots could help. You had a look what was in the market. None of them were working for you, and then you've now ended up with a company, and you have a something kind of really incredible. Like, what's that step between, I think things should be different, and actually building and engineering and coming up with something that actually works?
So I think we were incredibly lucky. There were 5 of us
Mhm.
that got together, and each one brought certain skills to the party. And I think quite differently from a lot of people. I've got quite a lot of lateral thought. I'm sure I've got ADHD or something. And Luke is incredible. He's got technically vision. Paul and Keith, two of our other co-founders, likewise, technically incredibly talented people. And then Martin, who was our first CEO, he brought a sort of stability to the team of 5 of us. So it was all incremental.
Mhm.
I was thinking about robots as a way, but didn't like what was on offer. Luke had done a bit of work on robots, as had Paul and Keith. And when we got together, it was a matter of us saying, what is it that we want from this robot? And one of the things I insisted on was that it's the same size as the instruments you use handheld. So the small ones, so they can go into the abdomen, less scarring, less pain. I wanted the modularity because that gave you the freedom and also meant you could replicate. I always say we are the only robot in the world that completely replicates keyhole surgery, port positioning, port size, procedural steps. So at least from the outset, we can claim the same results. What we are starting to show is even better results. And this is a journey that we're on at the moment as well. How do you go from A to B? I never know. It just happens.
I'm going to dig in there a little bit. So you have this idea. You've like you've outlined some kind of requirements, and you're working with one of your co-founders who's built robots previously. Do you sketch it up, or you just say I want something that does this, or?
So that was a great story. Luke had an idea in his head. I mean, he has to be praised for the actual design because, as I said, all other robots hold instruments like a dagger in your fist, and ours holds the instruments end on. And that's because Luke designed a wristed arm on the robot that could do all the movements. And he always modestly says in a few years' time when the patents run out, all robots will look like ours. which is probably true, and but that it's a matter of also respecting people and working well together. So we've all made mistakes in the genesis of the robot, and from time to time, and you also have to learn to work as a group. So there was a particular fault that I was concerned about in the beginning with the instruments, and that wasn't listened to for quite a while. And then, unfortunately, I proved to be correct, so they had to be redesigned. But then as you work as a group, you learn each other's skills and strengths. And we also we had the good fortune of being in a city like Cambridge, which is wall to wall with young, bright researchers and PhD students and so on. And I often say I'm not sure we could have done this in many cities other than it. We really do have some of the brightest young people working with it. So it's very much collaborative. You've got to listen to each other. You've got to learn to respect each other. Paul, my co-founder, and I, in the beginning, used to fight like crazy. And Martin would come out on weekends and calm us both down. And then he made some mistakes. I made some mistakes. I saw him make some wins. He saw me make some. And you slowly work closer and closer together. And Paul and I are now incredibly close friends. And I miss working with him at the moment. He's with a different robotic company now.
And how long did that process go from, say, in you guys coming together to coming up with your first prototype to coming up with something that's kind of commercially
So we went
ready?
We went from a computer generated image in 2014 to having a working prototype 18 months later, which helped us with our early fundraising. We could actually show potential investors what we're doing, to first in human in 2019. So we went in 5 years from a drawing to operating on a human. That's something of a record.
And there's an approval process with that.
Yes.
And it's the first human, is that approved, or that's still?
Yeah, so we've introduced something completely different. I followed a concept called Ideal, and that's a group of surgeons. I was one of the earlier joiners to it, who developed a way of doing surgical research both ethically and more affordably. And we followed Ideal. So in the first phase, we worked on cadavers, and we worked on porcine models, and we did human factor studies. And that was so by the time we got to doing it in a human, we pretty much knew how to do every operation, where to put the ports, where to put the machines on the side. And we showed we could replicate keyhole surgery. And then you go into your first study. So the first study was 30 patients in a hospital with some incredibly skilled surgeons, and they do 30 cases, and then you stop. And then you wait 90 days and analyze it and look at the results. And then you go to your next phase where you start doing one in operation in the chest, one in the upper GI, one in the pelvis. And you start collating that data all the time, followed by running a registry alongside it, which is collecting a standard set of data on every single patient. And we've published that as well. So it's been an incremental. Ideal is a great way of introducing new surgery in a standardized fashion, affordably and ethically, with the patient in mind. So I knew, and if we had a complication, an independent committee with no ties to the company of senior surgeons would look at the video and look at the complication, and they would score it. Is it related? Is it something you'd normally see for that operation? Is it related to the robot in any way? Is it serious or not? And to date, we've had no serious complications as a consequence of malfunction of the robot or of a change of procedures with the robot.
And yeah, I mean, that sounds really impressive, but I normally with new technology, there's a very high bar, right? A much higher bar than kind of incumbent
I mean,
technology.
I think the good thing is that we have replicated keyhole surgery, but just with better instrumentation,
Yeah.
better cameras and so on. I mean, operating on 2D, two dimensions, is difficult.
Yeah.
3D makes such all the difference in the world, and so we're very proud of that set of statistics. Of course, now we're moving to the next phase where we want even bigger data with real world evidence and huge data sets.
I mean, obviously I'm a layman, a layman here. I've watched some videos of more traditional keyhole surgery, and then you look at the Versius robot, and you're like, holy smoke! It looks like we were in the dark ages beforehand. It seems like almost. Sorry, now I sound like I'm a pitch man, but I think you've convinced me. But it's just you can't unsee that, right?
No, you can't unsee it. And when you see the response of the surgeons on the ground as
Yeah.
well, and training, if you can truncate training and get it to a higher level in a shorter time, we need that in the world. There's a real shortage of skilled surgeons, and so it's a way of overcoming a problem.
Maybe that's a good point to talk about surgeons and their reactions. And I do you, well, one, I'd love to hear just kind of maybe a few sort of. I know you're going to tell me the good stories, but just kind of a few anecdotes. But do you also get resistance as well? Like,
Yes.
very skilled surgeons who like a robot can never replace, like, not never replace me or can never help me or things along those lines
So
as well.
when we were building the robot, one of the things we did is we did a Delphi poll on surgeons who were skilled keyhole surgeons who hadn't converted to robotics,
Hmm.
and asked them, why haven't you done that? And they came up with a whole set of reasons why they hadn't converted. So in the design of our robot, we aimed to overcome those barriers that surgeons had raised. And there are still surgeons now that say, well, I don't need it. That noise is diminishing as the advantages of robotic surgery come to light. But it's what we really need to be responsible about is to make sure that we don't think that everything is going to be better by robotic surgery. And so we have to continually produce the data, the evidence, and support that what we claim is better. And it's when keyhole surgery came out is a great example. The data shows that early stage cervical cancer, that's cancer of the mouth of the womb, had better results in open surgery than in keyhole surgery. Now, that work is being repeated, and we think we know what the reason was, but that's what the data showed. So all the keyhole surgeons in the world doing that sort of surgery went back to doing it open. And that is responsible medical practice. Just because I've got a beautiful robot, I also need to have the data to show that it is genuinely better than other ways of doing things.
And maybe just on that point a little bit, with the robot and the approval for usage, is that by procedure, or do you have to say, okay, we're approved to use the robot for procedure X, procedure Y? Do you have to do it case by case and just
Pretty much, we get the regulatory process differs slightly
uh,
country to country and in different geographies. But basically, you've got to first of all prove that it's safe and can works well. And then you have to get approval for. So in the beginning, we did the studies in such a way that we got approval for the whole of the abdomen, the chest, Then we've done studies to do transoral surgery, busy trying for approval for that. Then we wanted to do pediatric surgery, which is one of the really exciting stories around the robot. And we had to do specific studies and then apply specifically for regulatory approval to do children. And so it goes. And that's a responsible way of doing things. And, in the UK, they've had quite a shift in the MHRA, which is one of the authorities. They've appointed a new chief executive who's really smart and very geared up to improving the regulatory process. And when we did the pediatric study, from the finishing of the trial to getting approval was 3.5 months. That's something of a record in itself. So Lawrence Talon, who's the chief exec, needs to be complimented for, because what we're showing there is, if you've got something good, don't put barriers around it. If the data's good, get it approved as soon as possible, and that's not a bad thing. We don't want things we've seen too many things in the past come to markets, great idea, and then the trouble starts. And a very good example of that is transvaginal mesh, which they were putting in literally hundreds of thousands of cases, and now it's banned because of the complications it caused. So regulatory is a necessary step, and it does frustrate people because it slows things down. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is the patient on the table, and whatever we do has got to be aimed towards looking after them.
Yeah, I'll echo that. Whenever I worked in pharma, I was massively grateful that we had regulation in place, and there's the balance there, right? You don't want it, as you said, you don't want it to be a barrier to innovation, but you want safety and effectiveness to be kind of paramount. Like you don't want kind of rogues kind of entering, and you just want to make sure everything is safe, and regulation helps with that.
And that's one of the massive advantages and the really exciting areas of real-world data and real-world evidence. If we can find a way of collecting that data automatically, so the surgeon's not fitting it in, just taking it out of the electronic records, and so you pass your regulation, that goes into your routine use, and then you start collecting thousands and thousands of data sets. So you make sure that as your numbers grow and as your indications expand, that you are genuinely still safe.
Yeah, it's incredible. You talked a little bit about pediatric surgery, and I'd just like to explore that a little bit. I'm guessing it's a lot more complicated because children's bodies are smaller. Is that it?
So, I have enormous respect for pediatric surgeons. It's difficult. They're tiny, some of them. I mean, obviously, pediatrics runs from 18 years of age downwards, so there are pediatric patients bigger than me. But as you get down towards the babies, the organs are tiny, and one of the big operations having to be done for children is where the pipe between the kidney and the bladder is narrow, and the kidney swells up, and they do an operation called a pyeloplasty. And the diameter of that pipe, the ureter, is about the size of a little finger. And you're standing with these long instruments. This is in routine keyhole, trying to suture end to end. And only a tiny percentage of people can actually do that. So we went into 3 sites in Southampton, in Guy's and Thomas's in London and Manchester. And we just finished a prospective formal trial with the surgeons at the end of it all applied for ethical approval to continue to use the robots before it got regulatory approval, because they ethically believed they couldn't go back to doing handheld surgery. And there were also other exciting ones. There's a surgeon at one of the hospitals who had tried keyhole surgery and failed at it. Then he got a younger colleague joined him, and he would refer all those patients to the younger colleague. That was one of our sites. When we went to do the study, he asked if he could try and train on the robot, which we allowed him to do. And it has put him good enough to participate in the study. So that's where really robotics is. We know keyhole is good. We know a lot of people can't do it. So if we can actually enable people who can't do keyhole surgery to convert to doing keyhole robotically, we've really made a big step. And we saw that in the pediatric study, and we've seen it in a gynae study as well. So peds is exciting, and the results are proportionately better. than the published literature. So it's a very exciting area for us.
Can I just want to. I'm sort of taking that in a little bit. It's a really incredible point. It's almost an articulation of a real articulation of what I saw on, when I've been watching the YouTube videos. I see the older instruments, and then I see this like fancy robot, and I'm like, how can you go back? And the example you gave with the pediatric surgeons was after they had used robotics ethically, they didn't want to go back to doing it the
Yeah.
traditional way. And then I'm just repeating what you're saying. It's because it's so important, and I think it takes a little bit of time to sink in as well. And then the other point you made is there was a really experienced surgeon who just didn't have the skills to do keyhole surgery, but with a robot he could. So you have all of his experience, um, and
And he's
and you've given him the skills.
and we've looked at his times.
Uh-huh.
He's not far different from his younger colleague. And we had a similar one in gynecology in one of our centers in Europe, where we did a gynae study. Was a surgeon who had tried keyhole, really couldn't master it, had given it up, was doing open surgery. And then his young colleague we recruited to do a study. He also said, could he have a go at the robot? And he also, so not only did he get good enough to do it, he was good enough to participate in the study.
Mm.
And so that to me is very exciting. If we can shorten training and get more people doing it and get them doing it at a higher level, we truly are getting towards solving the problem of increasing the surgery up to 80%.
Can I just quickly ask you that point? What's the difference between being able to do it and being included in the study? Is it a higher level of skills that you
No,
do?
well, that's also changing as well now. For all our American studies, they insist we have young new surgeons, inexperienced. They insist we have ones with sort of a moderate level of experience and ones with a high level of experience. So that is a change. But typically, you would only include surgeons in a study who can do the procedure, so that it's not about the surgeon, it's about the procedure and the results that you get as a result of it. But that's changing as well now. And that's again where, so our keyhole surgeons that did the pediatric study, one of them was an open surgeon as well, who learned on the robot. So the first keyhole surgery robotic cases he did are all in the study. So, and they did 150 patients with 7 surgeons. So ultimately, it means they're all pretty much still in their learning curve. And yet, despite that, they still got better results.
Are there scenarios where the traditional tools for keyhole surgery would be used versus a robot, or is the future the robot can circumvent all of that now?
But I think
And I'm thinking a little bit like, is the future the way this is done 100% or 99.9%?
that's a great
It-
question. It's a great question because there are 3 scenarios. And the one is that you do the entire thing robotically. But there may also be a role in doing part of it handheld and then the more complex bit robotically as a way of holding down cost. And then there's another argument is not all instruments in robotics necessarily need to have a wrist in them and be articulated. Some could also be rigid, and that would reduce the cost of production. And that's what, all our instruments are multi-use, and we spend a lot of time just increasing the lives.
Mm.
They started at about 3 lives per instrument. Now we're up at around about 20. And again, this is part of this pursuit of value-based medicine, of getting the same or better results, but on controlling cost. So, but there will be people that do, some of the operation handheld and then go to robotic. There'll be some people who do it beginning to end robotically. One of the things that drives the surgeons to complete robotic is their personal comfort.
Mm.
And when you do keyhole surgery, you're standing, you've got 2 arms in the air in a very awkward pose. When you want to use the foot pedals that you use, you put all your weight onto one leg, which curves your back slightly. And by the end of a day of keyhole surgery, you're absolutely shattered and exhausted. On the robot, you're sitting or standing in a neutral position. Your neck is straight, your arms are resting on a bar, and your hand movements are far less because you have touches and these articulated. And so the ergonomic injuries to robotic surgeons are hugely reduced compared with laparoscopic surgeons.
Oh, wow. Can I just quickly, what are the foot pedals for?
That is we don't have foot pedals.
Okay.
In traditional laparoscopy, they use foot pedals for other functions like diathermy. When you want to hit the instrument that burns or closes the blood vessels,
Okay.
they use it with a foot pedal. We've made ours completely hand controlled because we looked at the gaming industry. Some of the older surgeons still say they'd like a foot pedal. The younger ones don't. They're used to playing, with instruments using their hands only.
Okay, fantastic. I think this is a good point to maybe talk about the future. So I'd love to maybe use our or your imagination a little bit and think about what could the future look like. Say we project 10, 15 years forward. What does the future of robotic surgery look like? What are the advances? What would be different for patients? What would be different for surgeons?
So the one will be the data management. So we'll know a lot more about them and a lot more about the differences between different racial groups, different sexes, etc. So that will be, we have great knowledge acquisition as we go into the next 10 years. There will be automation. We're starting it. Where that ends, I don't know yet. I suspect that operations will get faster. I suspect that people do even more complex surgery in some areas because they've been enabled to do it, and we'll have this constant feedback loop, and that means that we may need less highly skilled surgeons, and you could almost envisage a technical surgeon who the decision to operate is made by a highly skilled diagnostician surgeon, and even there the large language models may intervene. And then the person operating may be not always a fully trained surgeon
Mm.
who is there to put the ports in, but the robot to do a large percentage of the complex side of the surgery. And I 3 years ago would have never said that. I really do think that it's going to be a very different world that we see in 10, 15 years' time.
And can I ask you, when I first got into this topic of robotic surgery, you can see there are a lot of misconceptions. I think maybe they're quite common. Um, in my head, I was thinking the robot could be fully autonomous. I was thinking a lot about telesurgery, and you've got a surgeon in I don't know, Chicago operating on someone in Mumbai, or vice versa. Um, and then I never really got into the Tesla humanoid robot, but replacing a surgeon. But that's kind of a little bit of a meme. Are any of these things kind of real, or are they all red
So so
herrings?
so
Would you say?
telesurgery is a real issue at the moment. So many robots are, if you have a robot in one city and a robot in another city, you can operate from one city to the next. And they used to say there was a problem with the latent phase. If your latent phase got to 250 milliseconds, then you couldn't operate across a certain distance. But that's all been overcome as well. So you can certainly operate with some robots in, you know, say London on somebody in Munich. Now, that means both hospitals have to have the same quality of robot. It also means they have to have the same quality of perioperative care. You can't suddenly bring this highly skilled doctor from New York who does a massively complicated operation in a low and middle income country if they don't have an ITU to go to afterwards
Mm.
and they don't have the nurses to look after them. And one of the big problems in the world at the moment is that 90% of complex surgery is carried out in geographies that serve 10% of the world's population.
Mm.
So there's a real pressing need to improve surgery, and it's something I'm actually very interested in. Whether telesurgery solves that is unlikely, I believe. If you've been operating in New York all day from 7 in the morning till 8 in the evening, do you really want to go and get on a robot at 9 at night
Mm.
and operate on somebody on the other side of the world? So I'm not that sure. Where telesurgery, I think, will have a really big role is I'm a surgeon, I have my robot, and you have your robot. They're both the same, and you're doing an operation that I can't do.
Mm.
And I read up on it, and I think, yeah, I can probably do that, but I'd like some supervision. So without you having to get in a plane
Mm.
You sit on your robot and I sit on mine, and I start the operation and you talk me through it because you're watching it. And with telesurgery, you could come to a point where you could say, Mark, can I just take over for 2 minutes? This is how I would do it. So I think from a training point of view in supervision, because when I was a younger surgeon, when I was doing some fairly rare operations, people would either fly to see me in my hospital or I would fly across the world to demonstrate it. And that's not nice either, because then you're working in a theater with different nurses, maybe don't speak the same language. And so in terms of teaching surgery, I see telesurgery as something. In terms of solving the world's problems of a shortage of surgeons in certain geographies, I don't see it. I mean, there are things that in the low and middle income countries, running water, adequate electrical supply for the hospitals, pipe gases. There's so many other things that need to be sorted out. And what I would love to see is the device industry and the pharmaceutical industry getting together to see what could be done on a global scale to improve medicine for people in these low and middle income countries.
Um, I think maybe I mean, you've painted a a really exciting and optimistic future, right? Hopefully realistic. What are the sort of the headwinds and what are the tailwinds? Like, what needs to go right for some of these things to happen or to happen sooner?
So we do have to get a handle on regulation worldwide. And I'm not going to point a finger at any specific geography, but regulation can also be used as a bit of a negative tool. So you'll see with the diathermy machines, and these are machines that are used to seal blood vessels when you want to cut them, and the advertising will say it seals to 10 times the blood pressure. Now, when your blood pressure is 10 times higher than normal, the last thing that you'll worry about in the world is bleeding. So it's a completely false standard, but it's being set there to make the bar high and keep other people out. So things like that we need to get a maturity in it. At the same time, looking at cost, because trials are expensive. So things like Ideal are amazing. So we've got to constantly work at better ways of doing research, more affordable ways of doing research, and better ways of actually disseminating the work. I'm an idealist, and I'm afraid, at the end of the day, companies also need to make a profit to survive. But I am a believer that you can build a company and you can deliver health ethically um, and affordably. Um, but it needs a slight change in political thinking.
Mark, thank you so much. It's been a really incredible conversation.
Thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure being here.